Khalifah Harun al-Rashid. Ya. Dan siapa dia Harun al-Rashid ini? Beliau terkenal sebagai seorang khalifah yang berpandangan jauh, yang soleh, yang begitu menghormati alim ulama dan ilmuwan, dan beliau mempunyai hubungan dengan Charles Magnus, atau kita panggil sebagai Charlemagne, pemimpin ataupun raja orang Faranji di Eropah. Orang Faranji ialah nenek moyang kepada orang Perancis hari ini. Dan ada ceritanya tu, Harun al-Rashid pernah menghantarkan satu jam mechanical kepada Charlemagne. Dan diceritakan betapa majunya orang Islam pada masa itu dan betapa mundurnya orang Eropah pada masa itu. Diceritakan apabila mereka mendapat jam mechanical ini, mereka tak tahu apa nak dibuat dengan jam itu, ya, sebab mereka ni bukannya satu bangsa yang mencipta jam. Kemudian daripada jam itu, apabila berbunyi itu, dia menyebabkan raja dan orang-orang sekeliling ni tu, dipanggil entourage itu, terkejut. Dan ada yang kalangan mereka yang menyangka bahawa jam ini dimainkan oleh syaitan, sebab dia bergerak sendiri. Padahal
magic lah kira.
Ya, seperti magic. Padahal masa itu ada yang kita panggil sebagai al-alat al-mutaharrikah bizatiha, alat-alat yang bergerak dengan sendirinya. Ada benda ini dipelopori oleh orang Islam pada masa itu. Sudah pun dipelopori oleh orang Islam pada masa itu. Diceritakan sampai mereka pun pada waktu malam, ya, orang-orang Charlemagne ini datang melawat, menziarahi untuk melihat jam itu pada waktu malam. Dan mereka, apabila alat itu berbunyi, mereka menyangka syaitan itu sedang bekerja, dan mereka bawa kapak dan sebagainya menghancurkan jam itu, ya. Sehingga kan pada esoknya tu, apabila raja tengok jam tu dah hancur lebur, ini hadiah daripada Harun al-Rashid. Ada yang mencadangkan kepada Charlemagne supaya dibawa satu kumpulan, satu tim jurutera daripada orang-orang Arab untuk membaiki jam itu. Sampai kan Charlemagne pun dikatakan, dia menyebut dia tak nak berbuat demikian kerana takut diketahui akan kebodohannya itu oleh orang-orang Arab. Begitulah kemajuan sains dan teknologi orang Arab pada masa itu.
Muslim engineers, they were the first to introduce segmental gears and sinking floats into water pumps. By combining and developing these new discoveries and devices, Islamic engineers built the finest water clocks in the world at the time. These water clocks, however, were more than functional devices. They were examples of fine technology, beautiful, awe-inspiring machines that celebrated achievements in engineering, the universal nature of Islam, and the skill of the engineers themselves. The most notable engineer of clocks was Al-Jazari, a Muslim engineer from 12th century Baghdad. He built a large number of mechanical devices that revolutionized engineering, giving birth to the concept of automated machines or robots. Al-Jazari recorded 10 of his water and candle clocks in his book, The Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices. One of the most sophisticated water-powered astronomical clocks was Al-Jazari's castle clock, considered to be the earliest example of a programmable analog computer. Probably his most famous clock was the elephant water clock, a striking piece of fine technology. This eclectic work comprised of a large wooden carving of an Indian elephant supporting a tower holding two pivoting Chinese serpents, with an Egyptian phoenix on top. It also incorporated Phoenician water technology, 3 Arabian figures, and Persian carpets. A black and silver disc at the top of the clock showed the number of hours since sunrise, while the number of minutes into the hour was shown by a scribe's pen. Inside the belly of the carved elephant was a mechanism consisting of a perforated bowl inside a tank that governed the timings and workings of the clock. A small hole in the floating bowl regulated the speed at which it sank. As it sank, every half an hour, it tugged at a system of pulleys to initiate the next half-hour cycle of the clock. When the bowl submerged completely, it quickly tilted, sank, and triggered the next sequence of events. At the top of the clock, a channel of balls tilted so that a stopper was lifted to allow one ball to fall from the falcon's beak into the mouth of a serpent, which pivoted downwards. The ball was then tipped into a vase that triggered the mahout's mallet, hitting a cymbal which signified that half an hour had passed. As the ball collected in a trough, the float began to submerge again, and the whole process started all over, with subtle adjustments for the second half of the hour. The majestic elephant water clock was a bold statement of status, achievement, and technology, in which Al-Jazari incorporated some of the first examples of robotics into a complex machine. The Islamic Golden Age shone with the brilliance of many men and women. One in particular was Badi al-Zaman Abul Ez ibn Ishmael ibn al-Razaz al-Jazari, born in the 12th century in Al-Jazari, Mesopotamia, now southeast Turkey. An extraordinary engineer of his time, Al-Jazari served as chief engineer to rulers in early 13th century Anatolia and pioneered the development of automata, automatic control, robotics, and automated musical theatres. In this pursuit, he realized that machines could be made to operate independently and developed the first real programmable robots. In taking this approach, Al-Jazari created the first water supply system driven by gears and hydropower. He revolutionized the way in which engineers used the principles of levers, cams, weights and pulleys in machinery. And he was the first person to use crankshafts, cogwheels, pistons, suction, delivery pipes, and one-way clack valves in pumps. Al-Jazari described and illustrated his inventions in his Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices. It is considered a seminal work, and many of the ideas employed in the construction of these ingenious devices were useful in the later development of mechanical technology. Among the many marvelous mechanical devices designed and built by Al-Jazari was his castle clock, which was thought to be the first analog computer. The castle clock, with its gold zodiac dial, breathtaking bronze birds on its battlements, and fine group of mechanical musicians at its gate, was one of the grandest keepers of all time. The hours since sunrise were shown by the open doors on the clock front, as well as by roundels that lit up the passage of time. The minutes were reflected by the progress of a crescent moon across the clock's frieze. At its top, a large dial mimicked the movement of the moon and stars across the sky as the sun rose and set. Within the clock, movements were regulated by a most ingenious system of reservoirs, troughs and pulleys. Yet it was the smallest device, a cart that ran on a wooden track, that set off a dramatic chain of events leading to the telling of the time. The clock's central mechanism was a reservoir from which an accurately calibrated flow of water was allowed to seep into a float chamber and into a plate and spout. As a weighted float descended within the reservoir, it tugged at two pulleys, one that set the cart on its motion and another that slowly pulled a sphere, which in turn rotated a cut-out crescent disc to shine light from candles onto the roundels and shift the sun and moon dial on top of the clock. As the cart moved along its road, upon the hour, a vertical shaft triggered the upper and lower doors to reveal the figure of a man and the words, "Dominion is God's." When this happened, the gate on a rail behind the doors opened to release two balls which travelled down chutes and into the beaks of two gold falcons, which then tilted and dropped the balls into two copper vases, announcing the hour with a clash of cymbals. At the same time, the water that had escaped from the reservoir was directed into troughs to restart the clock's mechanism. For 3 times in the day, a pulley unplugged a trough and the water flowed over a scoop wheel, driving camshafts which activated musicians in front of the clock, the drummers and cymbalists who beat their instruments, and 2 trumpeters whose music was made by the flute-like sound created by the expulsion of air through whistle jars. At the same time, the cart continued its hourly journey, setting off the magical elements of the castle clock. Practical, beautiful, and ingenious. The castle clock was a fine example of the great work of Al-Jazari and his revolutionary contribution to mechanical engineering.
Is this a clock, you ask? How does it tell the time? How does it work? I will tell you now. The number of hours since sunrise is shown on the silver and black disc at the top of the clock, and the number of minutes into the hour is shown by the scribe's pen. The movements of the clock are regulated by a most wonderful mechanism that sits in a tank inside the elephant's body, a perforated floating bowl. There is a small hole in the floating bowl that regulates the speed at which it sinks. As it slowly submerges over half an hour, it tugs via a system of pulleys the scribe and his pen. When it is completely submerged, the bowl quickly tilts, sinks, and triggers a more dramatic sequence of events. Inside the cupola at the top of the clock, a channel of balls is tilted so that a stopper is lifted to allow one to fall, hitting a fan that turns the phoenix. The ball then drops out of one of the falcon's beaks into the serpent's mouth. As the serpent falls, rotating around its pivot, the weight of the ball tugs a rope that resets the bowl back to the surface of the water. The ball drops again into a vase that triggers the mahout's mallet and hits a cymbal, which sounds the half hour. As the ball collects in a trough, the float begins to submerge again, and the whole process repeats itself with subtle adjustments for the second half of the hour. This ingenious device is the work of Badi al-Zaman Abdul Ez ibn Ismail ibn al-Razaz al-Jazari, who was a Muslim engineer who lived north of Baghdad under the Ayyubi dynasty, shortly after Saladin the Magnificent. Al-Jazari built a large number of mechanical devices that revolutionized engineering. He described many of them in his book of knowledge of ingenious mechanical devices.